Hello once again and welcome back to La Crime Noire. As we prepare to start, feel free to drop a comment mentioning where you're listening from. I truly appreciate reading everyone. If you enjoy spine-chilling and haunting stories, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Quick heads up, there will be 3 ads in the first 10 minutes. After that, the rest of the video is entirely advertisement-free, so you can sleep peacefully without interruptions. Now, settle in, empty your mind, let the outside world disappear, and let's begin. Story 1. It really was a perfect day to be out here. The air was cool, clean, and quiet, with a soft breeze that made the tops of the trees whisper to each other. Every so often, I caught a patch of blue sky through the leaves, like someone had torn holes in a green ceiling. The ground under my boots was damp and springy, covered in old leaves and bits of twigs. I was moving slowly and trying not to make noise, letting my feet find the spots that wouldn't crunch. My Remington hung across my shoulder, the familiar weight of it keeping me calm in a way I can't fully explain. The woods were mostly tall hardwoods, spaced out enough that you could see a decent distance in every direction. No thick brush, no tight tangles. Just trunks like pillars and long shafts of light that shifted when the wind moved the canopy. Ahead, I noticed a brighter spot where the trees opened up. A clearing. I eased toward it. Careful, because clearings can be good places to spot deer, but they can also leave you exposed. I stepped out from the shade and into the sunlight, and I stopped so fast it felt like my whole body locked. 2 things hit me at once. The first was a fire ring right in the middle of the clearing. Not an old one, not cold ashes, not the usual abandoned campsite. There was an active fire burning, real orange flames licking upward, smoke drifting away on the wind. And above it, balanced in a way I couldn't immediately understand, was a large pot. Except it wasn't a metal pot. It wasn't cast iron. It wasn't anything you'd expect to see out here. It was ceramic, glazed and pretty. The kind of thing you might see on someone's patio holding ferns. 2 feet tall at least, wide and round with a soft shine to it, as if it had been made for decoration, not for cooking over an open flame. It looked wrong sitting on that fire. It looked wrong in the woods. Even from where I stood, I could hear the low, wet sound of something gently bubbling inside. The second thing was a deer. A doe stood at the far edge of the clearing, right where the sunlight faded into the tree line. She wasn't feeding. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't flicking her tail and shifting her weight like they usually do when they're about to bolt. She just stood there and stared at me with those dark, wet eyes. It was so still for a few seconds that I honestly wondered if it was some kind of decoy someone had set up. But her ears moved. Her nose twitched. She was alive. My hands went instinctively to the rifle strap, but I stopped myself. If I reached too fast, I'd spook her. And there was something else, something about the way she watched me, that made me want to move carefully. Like I'd wandered into a place where I shouldn't make sudden decisions. I shifted sideways and stepped further into the clearing, slow enough that it was almost silly. 1 foot down every few seconds. Heel first, then toe. I tried to keep my breath quiet. The doe didn't run. She didn't even look away. 1 ear turned slightly, as if she was listening to something behind her. But her eyes stayed on me. I kept moving, And as I did, I got closer to both the deer and the fire. The heat from the flames touched my face. Smoke slid past me, smelling like wood, and something else I couldn't place yet. Then the doe lowered her head and took a step toward me. That stopped me more than the fire did. Deer don't do that. Not in the wild, not with a person holding a rifle. She took another step, slow and calm. I stood there like a statue, trying to understand what I was seeing. That's when I noticed a small movement in the trees on the other side of the clearing. Just a shift of brown and a flick of an ear. It wasn't only one doe. There were more. At first I counted 4. Then I realized there was a 5th, partially hidden behind a trunk. They stood close together just inside the woods, all facing the clearing, all watching. None of them moved. No chewing, no pawing the ground, no nervous jumping, just watching. The doe in the clearing came closer until she was maybe 12 feet away. I could see the fine fur around her nose. I could see the moisture on her nostrils. She raised her head and tested the wind like she was checking what I was. Then, just as slowly, she turned away, not startled, not spooked. She simply decided she was finished being interested. She walked back into the trees like she owned them. One by one, the other deer also turned and drifted away, calm and unhurried, as if they were leaving a porch after hearing the dinner bell and deciding the meal wasn't ready yet. As they disappeared, the breeze shifted, and the smell from the pot hit me full in the face. It was incredible. It smelled like a thick stew with herbs and onion and something savory and rich, like roasted meat. There was a warmth to it that made my mouth fill with saliva. The kind of smell that makes you realize you're hungry, even if you hadn't been thinking about food at all. The kind of smell that feels like home, like a kitchen, like comfort. All at once my stomach tightened, and I felt a sharp, hungry pull. Not a normal I-could-eat kind of hunger. It was sudden and deep, like I'd missed meals for days. Who in the world was cooking out here? I didn't have to wonder long. A woman stepped out of the woods on the far side of the clearing as if she'd been there the whole time and was just now deciding to show herself. She carried a bundle of sticks under one arm and a small burlap sack in the other hand. She walked with an easy confidence, like the clearing was her kitchen and I was the one who'd wandered in. She was attractive in a way that was hard to pin down. Lean, strong-looking, maybe in her 50s. Her hair was long brown with gray at the temples, pulled back and draped over her shoulders. Her clothes looked old-fashioned, but not like a costume. Like someone who'd always dressed that way. She wore a puffy vest, in a rust color over a rough blouse, and a red sash tied around her waist, holding up a long skirt with detailed embroidery that fell almost to her ankles. On her feet were worn leather sandals. She didn't look surprised to see me. If anything, she looked like she'd expected me. "Hoy!" she called out, loud and cheerful, like she was greeting a neighbor across a fence. I just stood there, not sure what to do with my hands. The rifle felt suddenly obvious, out of place. I didn't want to swing it around or even touch it. "Hello," I managed, 'cause my mind had gone empty. The woman walked straight to the fire ring and dropped the sticks. She opened the burlap sack and poured a couple of handfuls of mushrooms into the bubbling stew. The mushrooms hit the surface and bobbed for a second before sinking into the thick reddish liquid. She leaned down to pick through the sticks, choosing one that looked like old deadfall. When she bent, Something about her changed. It was small, like a trick of the light, but it made my skin tighten. She looked younger from that angle, and her hair seemed to have a warmer tone, almost auburn. She stood up again and, with quick, practiced movements, stripped the bark off the stick and shoved one end into the pot like she'd done it 1,000 times. She stirred once, slow and strong, and the stew rolled like something alive. "Hunting, are you not?" she said, bright as if she'd asked whether I was enjoying the weather. I nodded before I could stop myself. It felt like the safest answer. "Aye, me too," she said, and she winked. Then she brushed her hands on her skirt as if she'd just finished a bit of work. That didn't make sense. She had a pot of stew going. She wasn't carrying a bow or a gun. She was wearing sandals. Still, the smell kept digging into me. My hunger kept growing. It felt like the stew was pulling at me from inside my ribs. "Who are you cooking all this for?" I asked. My voice sounded rougher than I meant it to. She walked back over to the pile of sticks and started searching for another branch. While she rummaged, I noticed her hands. They looked wrong. A moment ago, they'd seemed normal, strong hands, a little rough from work. Now they looked older, much older. The skin sagged, the knuckles swelled. The fingers were thin and bent like dry roots. They were the hands of someone who should have been in a wheelchair under a blanket, not out here in the woods feeding the fire. Without looking up, she said, "Oh, they'll all come when it's ready." The way she said it made my stomach clench again. Not from hunger this time, but from a strange feeling that I was being included in something without my consent. She found what she was looking for and stood up. It was a thin branch, still green, flexible. She held it lightly like a switch. Her hands looked younger again. Not completely, but enough that my eyes tried to accept it. My brain wanted a simple explanation. Shadows, sunlight, my angle, stress. But none of that felt true. I'd seen what I'd seen. She turned to me and smiled like she was about to ask for a favor. "Do us a justice, dear," she said, "and give the meal a stir, would ye?" My first thought was to refuse. My second thought was that refusing might be a mistake. I couldn't explain why. I just felt it. The way you feel a storm coming before the sky changes. And the hunger was getting worse. My belly wasn't just empty, it was demanding. The smell of that stew made my mouth water so much it almost hurt. I stepped toward the fire, the heat stronger now, and reached for the stirring stick she'd left leaning against the pot. My fingers closed around it. The wood was warm and slightly damp near the end, as if it had soaked up the stew. I leaned over the vat. The stew was thick and red-brown, glossy on the surface. Mushrooms floated near the top. I saw an onion, whole, rolling lazily as the liquid moved. There were dark greens, maybe herbs, maybe something else. It looked like a real meal. It looked delicious. And the hunger inside me surged again, sharp and eager. I started to stir, slow and careful, dragging the stick through the heavy liquid. An unpeeled potato rose up, bumped the side, and sank again. Bits of meat spun past, chunks, not ground, not shredded. I caught the pale shine of fat. Everything about it looked like stew, until something larger rolled up from beneath the surface. At first, my mind wouldn't accept it. My eyes saw it, but my brain refused to name it. It was like looking at a shape in the dark and knowing it's wrong, but not being able to say why. Longish hair floated up like a sheet, spreading across the surface for a second before the swirl of the stew pulled it. The hair moved in a slow, gentle wave like seaweed. Then it sank slightly, and something pale broke the surface, an empty eye socket. Then part of a nose and cheek, with bits of flesh still clinging to bone, grayish and loose like it had been cooked too long. The stew rolled again, and an upper jaw surfaced, lipless, the teeth exposed in a dull grin as it turned slowly in the current I was making. For one frozen moment, I stared at it like it was a prop, like it couldn't be real. Then my stomach dropped so hard it felt like my insides shifted. The hunger snapped into something else, pure sickness and panic. My grip loosened. The stirring stick clanged lightly against the ceramic rim. I stumbled backward, almost tripping over my own feet. The scream rose in me like a cough that wouldn't stop, a big animal sound starting deep in my chest. My arms and neck prickled, the hairs standing straight up. I turned my head toward the woman. Her hair was lifting too, rising off her shoulders as if invisible fingers were combing upward through it. It reminded me of old science videos, people standing in a lab with their hair floating up from static electricity. Except this wasn't a harmless trick. The thin green branch was still in her hand. The end of it glowed. A small spark snapped at the tip, bright blue-white, and then another. The air around it seemed to crackle, and I realized I could hear it, a faint, sharp sound like dry leaves being crushed. A jagged arc of blue lightning jumped down from the branch and struck the ground near her feet. It hit with a sound like a hard slap, and leaves exploded upward where it landed, spinning and fluttering back down. My body went cold. Every part of me screamed to run, but my legs wouldn't move fast enough. Her face changed again. For a split second, she looked older than old, like a dried mask stretched over bone. Then she looked middle-aged again, calm and smiling like this was nothing. She stepped forward. Her eyes stayed on me, and then she lunged, thrusting her arm out, pointing that crackling branch straight at my chest. The blue fire leapt from it, winging through the air toward me, fast, hungry, and loud enough that I heard it over my own heartbeat. Story 2. I was second in command among the activist pilots in the Union, based out of O'Hare International. During the strike, O'Hare wasn't just an airport anymore. It became our unofficial headquarters, a place where people slept in corners, argued in circles, planned marches, and watched the news like it was a weather report that could kill you. I still remember the moment it stopped feeling like a normal labor fight and started feeling like something bigger, something wrong. Fred, our union boss, and Leo, the first in-command activist pilot, were in the pilot lounge that night, planted in front of the TVs. Every screen seemed to show the same thing. Picket lines at airports across the country, chants echoing through terminals, signs pressed up against chain-link fences, and reporters trying to sound serious while saying the same shallow lines on repeat. What do we want? The package. When do we want it? Now. The package was our nickname for the full list of demands. It wasn't just one thing. It was everything that had been building for years and then snapped after the body bombings the year before. We wanted more security, real security, not theater. We wanted better pay and benefits because airline profits never seemed to struggle, only the people who kept the system running. We wanted job security because every rumor of layoffs hit like a punch to the gut. And the part that made executives grind their teeth. We wanted cleaner fuel and stricter fuel efficiency standards for current and future airliners. That last demand always got painted like some environmentalist hobby in the media. But for us, it wasn't about looking good. It was about fleet upgrades, safer aircraft, and yes, long-term health and safety for crews and passengers. It was about the future not being some disposable thing. On TV, a news anchor said, "Well, folks, it's the 21st day of the pilot strike. Most jets have been grounded now for the last 18, as the pilots and their associated ground personnel unions have occupied major airports. Only major international carriers at the coastal hubs are landing or departing now. We've seen a huge increase in train and car travel as we approach the 4th of July weekend." Then the anchor shifted tone like flipping a switch. "And our next top story, as we gather for the holiday for the first time after the Omicron wave, health officials are advising to watch out for symptoms of a new skin." Fred hit mute. Fred was built like a barrel, balding, thick around the shoulders, thick arms, and thick dark hair on those arms like wire. Years of sun had left him with that tough, dried look you see on people who've spent their lives in heat and glare. He looked tired, but not the kind of tired that makes you quiet. The kind that makes you mean. Leo lit a cigarette, calm like he'd done it 1,000 times in that room. "There's no smoking in here, Leo," Fred said, trying to sound stern. But it came out more like habit than anger. Leo didn't flinch. He smiled, cigarette hanging there like it was part of his face. For a second, Fred held the look, then broke and chuckled. It wasn't a friendly chuckle. It was the sound of someone who'd stopped expecting rules to matter. "Media bums aren't even interested in what we want anymore," I said, watching the silent footage of chanting crowds. "Only these media bums," Leo mumbled around the cigarette. "Follow the money. That media group got a lot out of the bailout, probably more than us." Fred checked his watch. "We should probably get going." He stood like he meant to end the conversation, like time was something he could still control. Leo didn't move. He took a deeper drag and exhaled slow. "Let's make them sweat for once, for Christ's sake." "I'm with Leo on this one, Fred," I said. So we made the negotiators wait. Not because it was strategic, not because we were geniuses, just because after weeks of being treated like a problem to be managed, it felt good to let the other side feel even a small kind of discomfort. An hour later, we finally walked into the negotiation room. We sat on the left. Airline owners and their people sat on the right. It was the third meeting in 3 weeks, but something had changed. There was a new guy at the head of the table, a federal mediator. He had black-rimmed glasses that were almost square, thick gray hair, and a face with blotchy patches, like his skin couldn't decide what color it wanted to be. He spoke in that trained, clean voice people use when they're trying to sound calm while holding a knife behind their back. "I'm calling this meeting to order," he said. "Before I present this offer, I have to impress upon both sides how essential it is we start air travel again soon, both for the holiday but also for the good of the country." He glanced down at his papers. "I am at this time presenting a voluntary compromise. Officially, the federal government supports the pilot's initiative to enhance security in the wake of last year's incidents. We are prepared to use some of the unspent bailout money to supplement private airliners' initiatives and spending. We are also sympathetic to pilots and ground crews' positions on pay and benefits. He paused long enough for that to sink in, then kept going in the same flat tone. The federal government, however, is not, at this time, interested in imposing or supporting job security, fuel changes, or efficiency standards. I yield to the industry representatives for comment. On the airline side, their lead legal rep stood up like he'd been waiting for his moment. Michelson Connery. Young, smooth, the kind of guy who looked like he'd been born wearing a suit. Jet black hair, clean jaw, and a smirk that never fully left his mouth. He kept rubbing his nose like it bothered him, and I couldn't help noticing he did it about every 5 minutes, like a twitch. "You know, back in Jersey," he said, rising and adjusting his cuffs, "we're used to being shaken down, as they say." He looked around the room, enjoying the attention. "Now we appreciate the nice talk. We appreciate your brass knuckles and Tommy guns are firmly tucked away. We appreciate your giving us a break or two." His smile widened. But a shakedown is a shakedown nonetheless. He dropped back into his chair hard and crossed his arms. "No deal." Fred sat up like someone had yanked a wire in his spine. His mouth fell open. He cleared his throat and leaned into his microphone. "No deal," Fred repeated, like he was tasting the words and didn't like the flavor. Then he flopped back, disgusted. People started shifting, chairs scraping, both sides preparing to leave and scream to the press like always. "Before we depart," the mediator said, raising his voice just enough to control the room, "as I said, the federal government has a strong interest in resuming flights as soon as possible. We are considering using our unique power to impose a settlement on the Union if necessary." Fred lurched forward. "What kind of power? What kind of threat is this?" "It's no threat," the mediator said, but his eyes didn't match the words. "It's a threat to a threat. If necessary, we will invoke our powers under various emergency statutes to effectively federalize pilots and ground crews. Under those provisions, we would impose work or removal provisions to settle this." Fred's face went red. "That's total bull. You're basically telling us all they have to do is wait until you force us back to work." He slammed his palm on the table, then kept going, voice rough with fury. "And what about the future? These efficiency standards aren't about hippie environmental stuff. It's about fleet upgrades, fleet safety, and worker safety. And most importantly, in the wake of the body bombings, we're talking about customer safety, consumer confidence in air travel." The mediator held up his hands like he was calming children. "Gentlemen, please, I'm putting something on the table, and it has neither a definite nor indefinite timeline. In the meanwhile, your adversaries are hemorrhaging cash and depreciating their capital. And your folks, especially your ground crew union, are running out of savings." He stood, collecting his papers. "I suggest you both, in good faith, consider the current and official federal position in good time. Sort this out sooner rather than later, rather than a threat of a threat become a threat. Good day." Within hours, both sides held press conferences. Industry denounced the compromise. We denounced their denouncement. Nobody disclosed the mediator's warning. Nobody wanted to be the first to say out loud that the government had hinted it might force an entire workforce back onto the job. So we stayed on the picket lines another week, while both sides floated unserious proposals and fed the media a steady diet of nonsense. Then we found ourselves back in the pilot lounge, waiting for the next round of serious negotiations. That night, Fred and Leo were both smoking like the room was a bunker and the cigarettes were oxygen. I walked in carrying bad news I didn't want to say out loud. The ground crew union's gonna crack first, I told them. Industry is offering them a side deal, and I think they're gonna take it. If they go back to work, it'll be next to impossible to leverage the hubs. Then the scabs come in, and they'll work around us. Leo leaned back. Then maybe we float lower pay increases for ourselves, he said. Overall, you pay the few pilots a bit more. You pay the huge ground crew nothing more. Sounds like a win for us and industry. Fred stared at him. Leo, where do we stand on public support? Leo shrugged. I don't know. Fred's eyes narrowed. What do you mean you don't know? Leo grabbed the remote, clicked the volume up, and pointed at the screen like it was proof. Our top story tonight, the anchor said, farm fields across the country are being afflicted by some kind of blight, resulting in some cases, widespread crop failures, as the Department of Agriculture is mum. Meanwhile, more and more people are reporting severe skin deformations and damage, while the CDC has been all but muzzled, save for recommending that people stay inside, avoid swimming pools and water parks, and avoid direct sunlight. The anchor swallowed, then continued carefully. At this time, there is speculation, but no official word that the crop blight and the skin disease are connected. Leo clicked to another segment. Military officials say the recent observations of fighter, bomber, and Air Force transport planes across the country are simply routine summer exercises, but former military officers who have reached out say the military air traffic across the Northern Hemisphere is unprecedented, except in the lead-up to war. So fake, Fred snapped. I've been out in the damn sun all week on the line, and I've got nothing. Whatever this is, the news just wants to keep us out of the headlines and stop us from rallying support. He leaned forward, voice turning steady again. Anyway, we stay the course. We firm it up with the ground crews. Solidarity. A knock at the door. Fred stood, maybe hoping for good news. He opened it, and a neutral rep stepped in and announced the federal mediator had canceled the session. Leo and I shot up, ready to storm the delegation offices, but before anyone took a step, every TV in the lounge snapped to the same screen, the emergency alert system. The president's seal filled the monitors. Leo fumbled with the remote and unmuted it. My fellow Americans, the president said, it is with great dismay that after nearly a month of grounded air travel across these great United States, because of a dispute over many complex issues, I am forced to use power legislated to the executive branch by various emergency statutes. My stomach tightened before he even said it. To be clear, I am announcing the immediate federalization of pilots and ground crews. Effective immediately, they will have a 48-hour cooling-off period before I am ordering them, as federal employees, to return to work or be dismissed. The president's eyes looked dead, like the words had been written for him by people who didn't care what they sounded like. Also, their demands for higher pay and better benefits will be met in part by the conditions of federal employment. I will be going to Congress in the morning to seek long-term funding for our new national employees to secure their jobs for a long while. Any deviation from this will have significant physical consequences. The broadcast cut. For a moment, nobody breathed. Then ground crew reps burst into the lounge like a wave. Reggie Weston, their union head, was out front, furious and sweating. "Long-term employment? My ass!" he shouted at the blank TV. "That jackass knows this is a Band-Aid. There's no way Congress is going to pay us. In 90 days, we're as good as fired, begging for our old jobs with no retirement and no unions." He turned on us, eyes wide with raw anger. "I say we sit on the damn runways after 48 hours. You with us or not? Can I get a yes?" Leo's voice went low. "And here we heard you were about to sell us out. Now you're all in, huh?" "It was nothing like that," Reggie snapped. "You know how much talk flies." I felt my own hands shaking. "I'm with Reggie," I said. "This is unbelievable." Just like that, our retirement plan, our contracts. What? Gone? Forced to work basically at gunpoint? No. Leo looked at Fred. "Fred?" Fred stood there scratching his scalp like he was trying to scrape the problem out of his head. Then he straightened, took a drag, and turned to all of us. "Tell our folks," he said, voice hard as steel. "We're going to war." Some of us worried people would fold when the 48 hours ran out. But when hour 49 hit, the lines held. When the firing notices came, we held. When the police rolled in, we held. By day 4, 96 hours after the announcement, the picket lines weren't picket lines anymore. They were trenches. The pilot lounge wasn't a lounge, it was a war room. I had an ice pack wrapped to my arm from a rubber bullet that had hit and ricocheted. Leo kept blinking like he could still feel yesterday's pepper spray under his eyelids. Fred hadn't come back from the riot on the runways. Outside, the airport looked like a place the world had abandoned. Rocks and scorch marks, tear gas canisters like empty shells, Molotov stains on concrete, overturned vending machines and kiosks, chairs and tables from the food courts stacked into barricades. Someone had started a fire in a hangar, and it had burned long enough that the air tasted like melted plastic and metal. Then the power got cut. The Midwest heat poured into the terminal like water. The glass windows that looked so sleek and modern now felt like magnifying lenses. We had a few generators, but we used them for the CCTV system we'd rigged into the lounge TVs, so we could see where the next charge was coming from and warn people before they got trapped. On the 5th day, an injunction hit, filed and granted against the whole federalization order. The cops pulled back to the other side of the no man's land that had formed in the terminal and on the tarmac. It happened just in time. We were running out of bodies, out of energy, out of everything. The stand had been brave, sure, but it wasn't sustainable. That morning, leadership gathered in the pilot lounge, and we made our first of several discoveries that still wake me up at night. Reggie stood under the dead lights with a flashlight pressed to his bruised face. "We lost contact with our brothers at LAX and Denver International," he said. "How?" I asked. "Why? Did they surrender?" "I don't know about LAX," Reggie said, "but I got this out of Denver." He played a video on his phone. It was shaky and dark, but you could hear it first. The heavy chop and thump of rotors. 2 big transport helicopters floated into view like insects. Someone off-camera shined a strong flashlight on the side of one helicopter, and a logo flashed into view. A shield emblem I recognized from news stories and rumors. A private military contractor. With a reputation so bad, people said their name like a warning. The Black Dogs. In the background, someone yelled, "Get ready!" Then black-clad mercenaries streamed out of the choppers, fast and organized. The video ended abruptly, like the person filming had dropped the phone or been grabbed. "Oh my God," I said, feeling the words leave me before I could stop them. "They're gonna try to Pinkerton us." Leo slammed his fist against the chair. "What about the injunction?" "It's an injunction on the feds," I said, thinking it through as I spoke. "On the cops. These are private operators. If they're here, they're bought and paid for by industry." Leo went quiet for a second, then asked the question nobody wanted to ask. "You think they're gonna kill us?" That was the first time I felt real fear. Not the usual strike fear. Not the fear of losing money or public support. Real fear. The kind that makes your skin feel too tight. Then it got worse. A commotion rose at the door. People shoved inside carrying a makeshift stretcher. Fred was on it. For a moment, I couldn't process what I was seeing. There were too many hands and too much noise. Something like a towel covered most of his head and face. He was making a sound that didn't fit him, thin and desperate. "Oh my God. What did they do to him?" Leo said, rushing forward. My first thought was tear gas. People exposed too long sometimes look like they're drowning. But nobody had fired anything for hours. The crowd shifted, and I leaned in, shining my flashlight. "Pull it off," Fred rasped. "Pull it off. They have to see." Someone removed the towel. What was left of his face and head made my stomach flip. I took a step back without meaning to. His eyes were white, clouded over like severe cataracts. The skin of his head, face, and arms was covered in bulging blotches and lesions, pink and red, uneven and swollen. Black marks spotted through it like rot. Some areas looked burned. Other areas looked like growth, like the skin itself had become wrong. "It's the blight," Fred shouted, voice cracking. "Most of the ground crew. They look like this now. I can't feel any of it, and I can't see." People started talking at once. Someone said mustard gas. Someone said chemical exposure. Someone said it couldn't be real. Then Reggie's voice cut through the panic. "Hey, cameras are down." Leo spun toward the monitors. "When the hell did that happen?" he shouted, smacking the side of one TV like that would bring it back. I grabbed my radio and called for reports. South, east, west came back, shaky but there. When I called north, I got only static. Leo wanted to rally a group to push north and see what happened, but the people around Fred protested. There weren't enough uninfected, unblighted bodies to stop a charge if one came. We stood in silence for a few seconds. And in that silence, we heard it. The sound of guns being cocked outside the lounge door. Not one or two. A whole cluster, like a line of people preparing at once. A voice came through the door, calm and amplified. "Fred Little, Leo Jones, and Mark Debs, step out of the lounge slowly and peacefully. We wish to negotiate the end of this." My mouth went dry. "Fred is incapacitated," I called back, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "Reggie Weston of the Ground Crew Union is here. Leo and I can step out. Don't shoot." Leo and Reggie stared at me like I'd just volunteered us for execution, but there was no other move left. I pushed the door open. Tactical lights blasted my vision. 20 or so submachine guns pointed our way. The light was so harsh it turned the terminal into a white blur. The same voice said, "Keep stepping through the lights. That's it. Nice and slow. No one is going to hurt you. I just want to talk and show you something." Leo and I walked until the lights were behind us, and my eyes could adjust. In the open terminal stood the commander and 2 men with him, helmets off. "I'm Commander Don Doty," he said. "I'm here on behalf of the country, and I would like to share something with you." "Commander," I said, "with all due respect, there's an injunction in place." "I know," he replied. "That's why this is a private operation, not a military or police one." Leo's voice came out sharp. "Look, we don't have to go with you." Don's face stayed calm, but his patience showed like a line in the air. "Look," he said, "you do. Now I'm going to level with both of you. We stormed other airports today. A lot of my men are hurt, a few near death, but we know you're not holding out because you're strong. We know most of you have the blight now, and that's why we're here." Leo tilted his head, suspicious. "If this is medical mercy, where are the biohazard suits? Where's dedicated medical staff? Seems strange." Don nodded slightly. "It's not unknown. In fact, it's one of the most common problems around. What's still unknown is whether I have to drag you to what I want to show you, or if you'll come willingly." Leo and I looked at each other. Everything in me screamed that this was a trap, but Fred was blind and rotten alive in front of our people. The government had already threatened physical consequences, and now this man was offering answers. We went willingly. They took us out of the terminal and onto a motorized cart. It hummed through the heat toward the fuel hangars. On the ride, Don spoke like a teacher starting a lesson. "Tell me what you know about CFCs." Leo answered, "Chlorofluorocarbons, used in fridges and spray cans. Banned in the 80s because they were destroying the ozone layer." Don nodded. "Good." We reached the fuel hangar. A small group of black dogs was there, holding a ground crew member in detention near a partially open sliding door. His badge was gone, but I recognized him. Fuel truck lead team. "What does this have to do with anything?" I asked as we walked inside. "Right now, I am asking the questions," Don said, cutting me off. Then, out of nowhere, Don saluted the fuel truck attendant. To my shock, the attendant saluted back. "Semper Fi," Don said. "Once a Marine, always a Marine," the attendant replied. Don gestured. "Show them. It's okay. Show them what you know. Show them what you do." The attendant walked to one fuel truck and opened a spigot, splashing jet fuel onto the concrete. He shone a violet UV flashlight over the puddle and the back of the truck. Nothing happened. "Ordinary jet fuel," he muttered. Then he went to the truck beside it. He aimed the UV light at its rear panel. A square code marking appeared like invisible ink coming alive. He opened that spigot and splashed another puddle. When the UV light hit it, the fuel lit up with a strange, dazzling effect, like a rainbow trapped in liquid, like the concrete was bleeding prism colors. "Not so ordinary jet fuel," he said quietly. Don watched our faces. Then he asked, "Next question. What have you heard about chemtrails?" Leo let out a sound between a laugh and a gasp. I said, "I've had people in bars yell at me that pilots are spraying chemicals, geoengineering, COVID, nerve gas. The story changes depending on what they're scared of that month." Don didn't smile. He looked almost tired. For the past 50 years, he said, we've known CFCs damaged the ozone layer and created a hole. You were told the hole was healing after bans. That's only partially true. He pointed at the glowing fuel like it was a confession. It's healing because we fixed it. Or more accurately, because the people who work in the sky and on the ground, by the sheer volume of commercial air traffic worldwide, have been burning modified fuel. That fuel deposits its chemical composition at altitude to keep that ozone hole closed, or at least keep it from opening the way it wants to. My throat tightened. You're saying, I'm saying without it, Don continued. The protection breaks. Then you get what you're calling the blight. You get crops failing. You get hospitals filling with radiation burns and cancers. Without you flying and fueling, holes are breaking open over North America. Reggie wasn't there, but I could hear his voice in my memory from earlier, angry at the TV, flipping it off. Now I imagined his face if he'd seen this. Leo whispered, barely audible, so we really have been spraying chemtrails. Don didn't correct him. He let it sit. Then he stepped closer. His voice stayed level, like he was explaining a contract clause. Here's how this is going to work. Other Black Dogs units, funded by the federal government, are at every airport right now. They're showing your leadership the same thing. They're also showing it to industry. He held up a finger like counting terms. You're getting the mediator's deal. You'll have your old jobs back, pay and benefits improvements, some support money. And while a handful of you will go to jail for rioting, none of you will be convicted of felonies or serve real time. He looked at both of us. That's the deal. Leo's eyes narrowed. And if we say no? Don's expression didn't change, but the air did. Like a pressure drop before a storm. All you have to do is say yes, he said, and tell everyone to go back to work now. With you back in the air and back on the ground, the holes will close and the blight will end. I stood there in that hangar, smelling fuel and concrete dust, listening to the faint hum of generators and distant shouting from the terminal. And I realized we were trapped in a choice that wasn't a choice at all. In the end, we went back to work. We took the deal, if you can call it that. It wasn't a real deal. It was a reset with a cost of living increase and a gun behind it. The other option wasn't just losing the strike. It was prison, financial ruin, permanent blacklisting, and the very real possibility that Leo, Reggie, and I would be shot on the spot if we pushed too hard. We were sworn to secrecy about the ozone and the fuel and the so-called chemtrails. We were told it was national security. We were told we'd be treated like traitors if we spoke. I'm breaking it anyway. I'm breaking it because you deserve the truth, even if it ends up tossed into the same corner of the internet where people argue about aliens and Bigfoot. I don't care. I'm not a nobody. I'm not some random guy with a shaky video and a wild story. I'm a known name. And if something happens to me, if I end up in some neat little accident, I'm pretty sure that won't make people doubt what I've said. It'll make them look closer. Happy landings. Story 3, I started substitute teaching for 2 reasons. First, the hours worked with my daughter's school schedule. Second, the district was so short on people they would take almost anyone as long as you could pass a background check and you had a bachelor's degree in anything. Mine was in journalism, which I hadn't used in 3 years. Subbing wasn't what I pictured for myself. It felt temporary even after months of doing it, like I was borrowing someone else's life one classroom at a time. The placement coordinator would text me the night before, sometimes the morning of. A name, a school, a room number, occasionally a helpful note. 7th grade science, lab materials in closet B. Most of the time, it was just the basics, like ordering a ride share. I'd show up around 7:15, go to the main office, sign in, get handed a key or a badge if I was lucky, then spend the day in someone else's classroom. Someone else's chair, someone else's dry erase markers, someone else's smell of coffee soaked into the rug. I'd follow someone else's lesson plan and pretend I had authority over 30 kids who knew I didn't. Kids can smell uncertainty, the way dogs smell fear. I'd been doing it for 8 months when I got assigned to Hadley Middle School. Hadley was a 40-minute drive, longer than almost all my usual assignments. I normally stayed closer to home because if my daughter's school called, I needed to be able to get there fast. When the text came in at 6:02 a.m., sub-needed, Hadley MS, room 114, Mrs. Okafor, full day, I stared at it, half awake, thinking the pay didn't justify the commute. I almost turned it down. I really did. But I'd had 3 cancellations that week, and my savings had been shrinking in a way that made me feel guilty every time I bought groceries. So I dragged myself out of bed, got dressed in the dark, and drove out there, while the sky was still that deep, early morning gray. Hadley Middle was one of those flat-roof buildings from the 70s. Pale brick, narrow windows. The kind of place built to last, not to feel welcoming. It sat back from the road behind a wide parking lot, and even though it was early, there were already cars scattered around like everyone had arrived and disappeared inside. I parked in the visitor lot and walked to the front office. Inside, the air had that school smell right away. Floor wax, paper, and something sweet underneath. Like old cafeteria food that never fully leaves the walls. A woman with reading glasses pushed halfway down her nose handed me a clipboard without looking up from her computer. Room 114, she said, down the main hall. Turn left at the gym, all the way to the end. I thanked her. She'd already turned back to her screen, fingers moving fast, like I was one more task to clear out of her way. I followed her directions, my shoes making soft squeaks on the tile. The corridor was quiet, but not empty quiet. It had that early morning tension, like the building was awake before the people were. I passed the gym doors, turned left, and walked down to the end. Room 114 was the last door on the right. When I pushed it open, the lights were already on. That should have been nothing. Maybe the custodian had flipped them on while doing rounds. Maybe the teacher liked to keep them on. Plenty of teachers do. Still, it stood out in my mind later, like a detail you don't care about until you suddenly care about everything. The classroom looked normal in that clean, staged way rooms look before kids arrive. 30 desks in rows of 6. A reading corner in the back left with 3 beanbag chairs and a wooden bookshelf. Vocabulary words on a corkboard near the window. A small whiteboard next to the door with the date already written. October 14th. It was correct. I didn't stop to wonder who wrote it. I assumed it was Mrs. Okafor. Some teachers come in early and do the board before they leave. or they do it the day before, or they have a student helper. It didn't feel like a question worth asking. On the main desk, a lesson plan sat in a plastic sleeve like it was being protected from the world. When I slid it out and read it, I could tell right away Mrs. Okafor was a serious teacher. Everything was detailed: which handouts to use, where they were located, which students sat where, who needed extra time, who had accommodations, who should never sit together. 7th grade English, 3 class periods, and a prep in the middle. I always do a quick walk around the room before the first bell. It's a habit now. I check the exits, locate the phone, find the folder where the attendance sheets usually are. I look for the stuff kids will try to steal or mess with if I'm distracted. The candy drawer, the stapler, the prize bin. I don't mean that in a mean way. It's just how middle school works. They test you. Everything looked in order. I went back to the desk and read the plan again to make sure I could explain it clearly without sounding like I was reading off a script. The first 2 classes went fine. It was one of those days where nothing dramatic happens, which is the best kind of sub-day. They were doing a short story unit. I handed out the worksheets, answered questions like, "Do we have to use complete sentences?" and said yes, because if you don't, they'll give you 3 words and call it a paragraph. I walked the aisles while they worked, reminded one kid to stop tapping his pencil, praised another for actually reading the story. Normal. Prep period started at 11:10. I sat at the teacher's desk, ate my lunch, and checked my phone. I remember scrolling through emails and half listening to the hallway sounds outside. Distant lockers, a voice calling out, a janitor cart rolling by. That was when I noticed the smell. It was faint at first. Something like cigarette smoke, but old. Like smoke that had soaked into fabric and sat in a closet for years. Not fresh. Not like someone had just lit up outside. More like a coat you borrow from someone who used to smoke. I didn't panic. I didn't even feel uneasy yet. I told myself it was probably coming from somewhere else in the building. Maybe the teacher's lounge. Maybe a staff member who smoked outside and the smell clung to their clothes. Schools are full of weird smells. Every building has its own mix. Still, I opened the window a few inches, just to get some air moving, and went back to my lunch. Near the end of prep, I got up to use the bathroom. I grabbed my hall pass, checked the room one more time, and as I walked toward the door, my eyes landed on the whiteboard. The date had changed. Not erased and rewritten in a messy way, just changed. Where it had said October 14th, it now said October 12th. I stopped and stared at it. I remember my first thought wasn't ghost. It was something practical and almost annoyed. How did that happen? I had been sitting at the desk the whole time. No students had been in the room. I hadn't even left the room during prep except to step into the hall for a second when someone walked by talking loudly. I leaned closer like the board would explain itself. The handwriting looked the same as before. Neat. Clear. Like a teacher wrote it. Not like a 7th grader messing around. I told myself I must have misread it earlier. That it had always said the 12th and I'd just registered it as the 14th because that was the actual date. The brain does that. You see what you expect to see. So I took the marker from the tray, erased October 12th and wrote October 14th again. Then I left for the bathroom, trying not to think about it, third period came in loud, like they always do after lunch. They flowed into the room in a wave of energy that didn't belong in a building with fluorescent lighting. I did my usual routine. Stand at the front, greet them, tell them to sit down, wait for the talking to lower from a roar to a manageable buzz. I handed out the same worksheets, explained the assignment, and started roll call. About 5 minutes in, a girl in the third row raised her hand. "Someone's in the reading corner," she said. I looked over. There was nothing there, just the bean bags and the bookshelf. "I don't see anything," I said, keeping my voice light. She lowered her hand without arguing. Her expression wasn't embarrassed, and it wasn't like she was joking either. She just watched me, steady and quiet, like she'd said what she needed to say, and my response didn't matter. I went back to roll call. As the class worked, I walked around the room checking progress. Halfway through, I went to the back to check on a student who hadn't written anything. As I passed the reading corner, the smell hit again, stronger this time. That same cigarette in a closet smell, but now it felt like it was coming from the corner itself, like something had been sitting there for a long time holding the odor, and the air had finally warmed enough to let it out. I didn't stop. I didn't look too hard. I kept moving because when you're subbing, you learn to keep the day moving. If you freeze, the class senses it. I told myself it was the ventilation. The building was old. Maybe the reading corner was near a return vent. Maybe a dead mouse was somewhere and my brain was translating it wrong. Lots of possibilities. None of them supernatural. None of them worth making a scene about. By 2:40, the last class had filed out. The final bell rang. The hallway swelled with noise and then began to drain as kids headed for buses and rides. I was packing up my bag when the woman from the front office knocked on the open door, the one with the reading glasses. "How'd it go?" she asked. "Fine," I said. "Good kids." She nodded, but she wasn't really listening. Her eyes moved around the room, not like she was checking for damage, but like she was confirming something was still where it belonged. "Did anything seem strange to you?" she asked. The question made my stomach tighten. I thought about the date on the board. I thought about the smell. I thought about the girl saying someone was in the reading corner. "Strange how?" I asked, careful. She made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Never mind. We ask all the subs. Some people get a feeling, some don't." "What kind of feeling?" I pressed. She looked at me directly for the first time all day. Her eyes were tired, but there was something else there too, a guardedness. "Mrs. Okafor had a sub last year who said she felt watched the whole day," she said. "The one before that said someone was moving her things. We had the room checked out. Nothing there." "What does Mrs. Okafor say?" I asked. "She doesn't use the reading corner," the woman said. "Hasn't for about 2 years." Then she said good night in the same flat office tone as before, and walked away like she hadn't just dropped a weight into my hands. I stood there with my bag half-zipped, staring at the reading corner. 3 beanbag chairs, a bookshelf, a little area rug. One of the beanbags had an indentation in it, the kind foam makes when someone has been sitting there. Not a sharp impression like someone just stood up, but a settled dip, like weight had been there long enough to change the shape. I tried to replay the day in my head. Had any student gone back there? I didn't remember anyone sitting in the reading corner all day. I didn't think I had even given permission for anyone to sit there. Most teachers don't like kids using beanbags unless it's a structured activity. I looked at the whiteboard again, October 14th, in my handwriting. Then my eyes dropped to the lesson plan still on the desk in its plastic sleeve. I don't know what made me check it. Maybe because the office woman had said Mrs. Okafor didn't use that corner. Maybe because the room suddenly felt less like a classroom and more like a stage set. At the top of the lesson plan was a date, October 12th. I stared at it, feeling my skin prickle. It didn't mean Mrs. Okafor had made a mistake. The plan was too careful for that. 19 years of teaching careful. She looked like the type who printed her plans, slid them into sleeves, and lined them up in a file cabinet by day and subject. Someone who knew what she was doing and had been doing it long enough that everything had a system, which meant she probably wrote the plan on October 12th, dated it, and intended it for a substitute, 2 days before I arrived. And that meant something else, too. Someone had come into that room before I arrived, before any students arrived, and written the correct date on the whiteboard. The lights had already been on when I got there. I remembered that clearly now. Bright and steady, like the room had been waiting. I thought about my earlier sweep of the classroom, how I'd walked around without really looking. I'd glanced at the reading corner without checking the beanbags, without checking behind the bookshelf, because you don't expect anything to be there. You assume a classroom is a safe, boring place. You assume a school is controlled. I zipped my bag the rest of the way. I walked out of room 114 without looking back at the beanbag chairs. I didn't run. I didn't slam the door. I kept my pace normal because schools make you feel silly for being afraid. Fear feels childish in a hallway with motivational posters and trophy cases. But my heart was going fast, and I was aware of every sound in the corridor, every distant door closing, every footstep that might be behind me. In my car, before I started the engine, I sat with both hands on the steering wheel and stared straight ahead. I try to talk myself down the way I always do when I get anxious. The indentation could have been there since yesterday, I told myself. Foam doesn't spring back quickly. The date on the board could have been a mistake. Maybe I wrote it wrong. Maybe I erased it without realizing. Maybe the marker smeared and made it look different. The smell could be anything. Old building, old vents, old furniture, somebody smoking outside. Probably. I drove home, and every light on the route went green in sequence, one after another, like the world wanted to prove how normal it could be. Cars moved in their lanes. People walked dogs. The sky looked like a plain fall evening. I got home, kissed my daughter, ate dinner, helped with homework, watched a show I barely paid attention to. I tried to let the day fade the way subbing days usually do, like a dream you forget once you're back in your real life. 3 weeks later, I got another text from the coordinator. Hadley M.S., room 114, Mrs. Okafor. My thumb hovered over the screen. For a second, I considered telling myself I was being ridiculous, that I needed the money, that it had been a normal day and I was building a story out of nothing. Then I remembered the office woman's eyes when she asked if anything felt strange. Like she already expected the answer. I took a different assignment. After that, I couldn't leave it alone. I try to make it make sense because that's what my brain does. It grabs at explanations. It hates loose ends. It hates the idea that something could happen with no reason and no fix. So a couple weeks later, when I had a reason to text the coordinator about my schedule, I asked casually, like it was just curiosity, "Hey, why does Mrs. Okafor keep needing subs?" The reply came back a few minutes later. "She's been on extended medical leave since September." I read it twice, waiting for it to change into something else. Since September. That meant she hadn't been in that building in 6 weeks. She hadn't written that lesson plan 2 days before I arrived. She hadn't walked into room 114 and turned on the lights. She hadn't written October 14th on the whiteboard. And whatever sat in that reading corner, whatever smelled like old smoke and watched the room, had been there long enough to learn how the school worked, long enough to know what day it was supposed to be, long enough to correct the board when it didn't match, long enough to wait for someone like me to step into the room and pretend for a few hours that classrooms are only filled with kids and paper and noise and nothing else. Story 4. I don't know where he came from. I can't point to a first day, a first moment, a first time I noticed him standing too close. If I try to remember, my mind slips like it's stepping on ice. It feels as if he has always been there, just a little off to my side, like a shadow that doesn't match the shape of the body that cast it. All I know is that once he was there, he stayed. No matter where I go, he comes with me. If I leave the house early, he's already waiting. If I come home late, he's inside before I even lock the door. It doesn't matter if I take the elevator or the stairs, if I change my route, if I move quickly through crowded places or hide in the quiet ones. He never loses me. He follows me into rooms where nobody should follow anyone. He is there when I bathe. Not behind a curtain, not at the door, not outside like someone trying to pretend they're being respectful. He is simply there, like the room belongs to him as much as it belongs to me. And when I go to the washroom, he follows me in like it's the most natural thing in the world, like privacy is a made-up rule that only exists for other people. At first, I thought I was going insane. I kept looking for explanations that didn't make me sound crazy. A stalker, someone from work, someone who had learned my schedule, someone who liked scaring people, and had found a way to get inside my life. I thought about cameras, threats, the police, restraining orders. I told myself there had to be footprints I hadn't noticed, locks I hadn't checked, windows I'd forgotten. But none of those explanations fit because he wasn't like a man who breaks into your home. He was like a man who had never needed permission. He is completely hairless, not just shaved, not close cut, not someone trying to look a certain way. There is no hair anywhere on him, no stubble, no eyebrows, no lashes. The skin on his head is smooth and pale under most light, but sometimes it looks stretched, too perfect, like a doll's head made to look human from a distance. His nails are the worst part after his eyes. They are long, too long. They aren't the kind of long nails people grow and file. They are long the way claws are long, thick near the base and narrow at the tips. When he moves his hands, the nails click softly against whatever he touches, and that sound gets into my head and stays there. Sometimes when he's bored, he drums them against his own thigh. Sometimes he drags them lightly across a table, just to hear it. He wears jewelry like it was put on him as a joke by someone who didn't care what it meant. A nose ring, several rings in his ears. He has no single style. One day, it's a loose shirt that looks like it came from someone's older brother. The next day, it's something tight and bright, something that looks like it belongs in a club. Sometimes he wears things that read as men's clothing, sometimes women's clothing. And the way he switches back and forth doesn't feel like self-expression. It feels like he doesn't understand the difference, or worse, like he understands it perfectly and likes making it unclear. He never asks if I'm okay with him being there. He never waits to be invited. He never says, "Do you mind?" He acts as if the question would be ridiculous. If I'm walking through a hallway at work, he's close enough that people have to step around us. If I sit down, he stands behind me. If I stand up, he stands up too. If I turn suddenly, I almost bump into him. It's like he's learned the exact distance that will keep him touching my life without technically touching my body, until he decides he wants to. When I talk to people and laugh, even for a second, he changes. He doesn't smile. He doesn't get angry in a normal way. His eyes narrow into a squint, like bright light hurts him. And he moves. He pulls me away, not always roughly, but always with a kind of ownership, like I'm a shopping cart he left for a moment and doesn't want anyone else to take. If I'm in the middle of telling a story, he finishes my sentence for me, even though he shouldn't know what I'm about to say. He says it in a voice that almost matches mine, like he's done this so many times that he has learned the rhythm of my words. If someone asks me a question, he reaches for me. He starts fixing my hair, smoothing it down, pushing it behind my ears. He straightens my collar, touches my sleeves, brushes invisible lint from my chest. I never ask him to. I never give him a look that says yes. I try to pull away, but the moment I move, he presses closer, as if my discomfort is part of the game. Sometimes he kisses my cheeks. It's quick, like a greeting, like something a friendly person might do, but there's nothing friendly in it. There's no warmth, no emotion. It's just a mark, a claim, a way of reminding me that he can do it whenever he wants. And sometimes he touches me in ways that make my skin go cold. A hand that lingers too long, fingers that press into my waist as he passes behind me. A touch that slides lower than it should, with his nails grazing fabric in a slow, deliberate way. When I react, when I stiffen, when I snap at him, he acts offended, like I'm accusing him of something unfair. He always says he's being cheerful, harmless, just playing. He irritates me so much that it becomes physical. My jaw aches from holding it tight. My shoulders stay tense even when I'm alone, because I never feel alone. I've told him plainly that I'm not gay. I've said it clearly, like maybe there was some misunderstanding and he just needed the words. He doesn't care. He always answers the same way, like he's reading from a script he enjoys. I'm not going into a relationship with you. We're just good friends. But good friends don't do what he does. Good friends don't pull you away from other people. They don't make your conversations about them. They don't touch you when you don't want it. And they don't follow you into the bathroom. The strangest part isn't even him. It's everyone else. People stare at us. I can feel their eyes. Sometimes I catch them looking and then looking away quickly like they've been caught. Some of them tilt their heads like they're trying to figure out what they're seeing. A few have asked me outright who he is and why he's always with me. Those moments feel like air breaking through a sealed room. Like finally, someone else sees it too. My heart lifts, just a little, with hope that I can explain and they'll help. I tell them the truth. I tell them I don't know him. I tell them he won't leave me alone. And as soon as I say it, their faces go blank. Not shocked, not confused. Blank. They nod like I've said something normal. They laugh a little like it was a joke they didn't quite get. They change the subject. They look away and act like none of it matters. After I reply, everything turns normal, like nobody cared in the first place. Like they asked only because they were filling silence, not because they were watching a hairless stranger cling to me in the middle of the office. It makes me feel like I'm the only real person in a room full of people who can be switched off and on. Sometimes, when we're walking through a crowded space, he watches the way people move around me. His eyes squint whenever anyone gets too close. And if someone stands near me too long, he grabs my arm. His grip is tight enough to hurt, but not tight enough to leave marks. It's like he knows exactly how far he can go without leaving evidence. Then he wraps his arms around my body from behind, pressing his chest against my back, his chin near my shoulder. When he does that, he whispers into my ear. His voice is low, soft, like he's telling me a secret meant only for me. The things he says don't make sense. Not at first. They're strange questions, like a child asking about the world. Except there's something sharp under them, something that makes my stomach feel sour. Why can't we be a mother to our parents? He asked me once. We were standing near the break room. People were moving past us with coffee and snacks. Nobody reacted. Nobody even slowed down. His arms stayed tight around me and his nails pressed through my shirt in a way that made me want to crawl out of my own skin. I didn't answer. I tried to pull away. He tightened his grip just enough to remind me he was stronger. Another day, he stared up at the sky through a window and said, "Why don't the moon and the sun stay together?" His face was close to mine. I could see every detail of his skin, too smooth, like it had never been touched by wind or cold. His eyes stayed half closed, squinting even though the room was dim. He asked it like he expected me to know the answer, like my silence was rude. In my mind, I begged him to leave. I didn't say it out loud. I had tried that before, and it only made him smile. So I begged in my head over and over like prayer. Please go. Please just go. Please let me have one day. But he kept talking. He always kept talking. The questions came in a steady drip that never stopped long enough for me to breathe. Then one day, as if he'd been thinking about it for a while, he asked me something that made the world tilt. Why would you kill someone who makes your lover happy? He said it casually, like it was a question about the weather, like it was something people debated on their lunch break. My mouth went dry. I looked around, searching for some sign that anyone had heard. A few coworkers were nearby. One was laughing at something on a phone. Another was typing at a desk. Nobody turned. Nobody reacted. It was like his voice only existed inside my skull. I wanted to tell myself it was a nightmare. I wanted to tell myself I was exhausted, stressed, imagining things. I wanted to tell myself to go home, sleep, and everything would reset. But he was right there. His nail clicked softly as he tapped them against my arm, waiting. After that, the days felt heavier. I started to avoid people, not because I didn't like them, but because every time I talked to someone, he would step in. Every conversation became a performance for him. Every laugh I had became a reason for him to pull me away. I stopped making jokes. I stopped staying in the break room. I stopped standing near windows. I tried to become boring enough that even he would get tired. He never got tired. There were moments when I almost convinced myself he was just a strange person who had attached himself to me, and somehow, for reasons I didn't understand, everyone else tolerated it. Maybe they thought he was my boyfriend. Maybe they thought he was my cousin. Maybe they thought it was none of their business. But that theory died in small ways. Like the time I walked into the restroom at work and he followed me in. And when another man came in and saw us, he didn't even pause. He didn't look uncomfortable. He didn't react like someone had just witnessed something inappropriate. He simply washed his hands, staring straight ahead, and walked out as if he hadn't seen anything. Like the time I turned suddenly in the hallway, and my shoulder passed through him, through his chest. Just barely, just enough that I felt a cold resistance, like pushing through fog over ice, and he didn't flinch. He only smiled and stepped closer, as if he'd enjoyed the mistake. And like the way cameras never seemed to matter, I told myself at least the security cameras at work would catch him. At least there would be proof. But the thought of checking them made me feel sick, as if some part of me already knew what I'd find. Still, I kept going to work. What else was I supposed to do? If I stayed home, he was there too. If I went out, he was there too. If I tried to distract myself with noise and people and light, he was there in the middle of it all, hairless and calm, wearing whatever he felt like, rings flashing when he lifted his hands to fix me. Then one day a girl from the office approached me. It was normal at first. She came over like people do, smiling a little too much, hands slightly nervous. She asked if we could talk somewhere quieter. I was so used to being on edge that my first instinct was to scan the room for him, even though I already knew exactly where he was. He was standing in the corner, not close to me for once, not touching, not whispering, just standing there, watching. The girl spoke softly. Her words tumbled out in a shy rush, but I understood them. She liked me. She'd liked me for a while. She wanted to know if I felt the same. She said it wasn't a joke. She said she wasn't trying to embarrass me. She just needed to know. For a moment, the world looked brighter. Not because I was suddenly fearless. Not because I thought romance would solve everything. But because something was happening that wasn't about him. Something real. Something human. And then I heard it. A sound that didn't belong in an office. A thin, broken sob. I looked past the girl. In the corner, the hairless man's body was shaking. His shoulders were trembling like he was freezing. His face twisted in a way that almost looked like pain. And then he started to cry, openly, tears sliding down his smooth cheeks. He looked small suddenly. Not harmless, but wounded. Like I'd finally found the thing that would make him stop. I don't know what I was thinking. I think I was desperate. I think I saw an opening and threw myself at it. I thought maybe this is it. Maybe if I say yes, he'll leave. Maybe he'll realize I'm not his. Maybe he'll get bored. Maybe he'll find someone else. Maybe he'll vanish the way nightmares vanish when you wake up. The girl waited, hopeful and scared at the same time. I swallowed and forced the words out. "Yes," I said. "I love you too." The moment I said it, the hairless man's crying stopped. Not slowly. Not like someone calming down. It cut off as if someone had turned a switch. I felt the hairs rise on the back of my neck. The air seemed to tighten, like the room had lost oxygen. The girl smiled, relief flooding her face. She stepped closer. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel like I was trapped inside someone else's story. I leaned forward, too. I let myself believe that maybe this would change everything. Our faces moved closer. I could see the curve of her mouth, the small tremble in her breath. I could hear the office sounds around us, distant typing, a chair rolling, a cough. And then something moved at the edge of my vision. Fast. A bench, not sliding, not tipping over, not being carried by someone. It flew through the air like it had been thrown by a machine. Full speed, straight across the room, spinning slightly as it came. There wasn't time to shout. There wasn't time to grab her. There wasn't even time to understand. It hit her with a heavy, awful sound. Her body folded and dropped as if the bones inside had stopped working. Her head struck the floor. The sound of it was small compared to the bench, but it was the sound that stayed in my ears. For a second, the office went silent, the way a room does when reality breaks. Then everyone started yelling at once. People rushed forward. Someone screamed her name. Someone shouted for help. A chair scraped. Papers scattered. Phones came out. Hands shook. But the confusion wasn't what it should have been. No one looked toward the corner. No one looked toward me like I was standing next to something impossible. They were astounded, but in the wrong way. They weren't asking who threw it. They weren't asking why there was a hairless man standing in the corner, crying a second ago and not crying now. They were asking how the bench could have moved like that. They were saying things like, "Did it fall? And was someone leaning on it? And how did it fly?" Fly. As if benches do that. I stood frozen, staring at the girl on the floor, watching blood spread in a way that didn't look real. My hands wouldn't work. My throat wouldn't make sound. I tried to find him in the chaos, and I couldn't. I turned in place, scanning the room, forcing my eyes into every corner. He was gone. The relief I'd wanted for so long didn't come. Instead, I felt something worse. A hollow fear. Like the moment you realize the thing chasing you has stopped making noise because it's already close enough to grab you. I pushed through people and ran, not out of the building, not away from the scene, but toward the only thing I could think of that might make sense of what I'd seen. The security office. My legs felt weak, but I made it there. I didn't know what I was going to say. I didn't know how I'd explain it without sounding insane. I just knew I needed proof. I needed something outside my own mind to confirm what had happened. Someone tried to stop me, asking where I was going, telling me to stay, but I didn't listen. My hands shook as I reached for the controls. The screens were already on. Cameras showed hallways, exits, empty rooms, places where nothing was happening. I found the camera angle for the office floor. I rewound. I pressed play. The recording showed the girl walking up to me. It showed me turning toward her. It showed her speaking, smiling, moving closer. It showed the bench, sitting harmlessly in the background. And then it showed the bench suddenly lifting, not slowly, not as if someone bumped it. It lifted as if pulled by an invisible hand and launched across the room. It struck her. People reacted. They rushed in. They screamed. And I watched myself standing there, staring at her, my face pale with shock. But he wasn't there. Not in the corner, not behind me, not beside me, not in the reflection of glass, not in any shadow, and not in any frame. There was no hairless man, no rings, no long nails, no hand on my arm, no one fixing my hair, nothing. I leaned closer to the screen until my breath fogged the glass. I rewound again, slower this time. I stared at every inch of the image like I could force him to appear if I focused hard enough. Still nothing. The room felt too quiet behind me. The kind of quiet that makes you aware of your own heartbeat. I sat back, dizzy, and my mind tried to protect itself by offering me the simplest answer. Maybe he was never there. Maybe I imagined him. Maybe I broke under stress and made him up. But my arm still ached in the exact spot where his fingers always grabbed. My skin still crawled with the memory of his breath at my ear. My stomach still twisted at the sound of his questions. And somewhere in my head, clear as if he'd whispered it right beside me, I heard the last one again, the one I hadn't answered. Why would you kill someone who makes your lover happy? I stayed in that chair for a long time, watching the empty corner of the screen, waiting for him to step back into view. He didn't. And that was the moment I understood something that made my mouth go dry. It wasn't that nobody noticed him. It was that nobody could. And if he chose to leave the camera blind too, then there would never be proof. Not for the police. Not for my co-workers. Not for anyone I begged to believe me. Only for me. Which meant if he ever came back, it wouldn't matter how many people were in the room. I'd still be alone with him. Story 5. My grandpa used to tell me this story when I was a kid. He said it wasn't something he made up, that it had been passed down through our family for generations. I never knew whether that was true or just part of the charm, but he believed it, or at least he wanted us to believe it. He told it the exact same way every time. Same words, same pauses, same slow build. I must have heard it 100 times, usually late at night when the adults were still talking and laughing in low voices, and the rest of the house had gone quiet. I'd be on the carpet or curled up on the couch, pretending I wasn't tired because I knew if I stayed awake long enough, Grandpa would tell it. Back then, I treated it like a scary story, something meant to get into a kid's head so the dark would feel darker. And it worked. For years, I couldn't look out a window at night without picturing eyes staring back. But I've had a few experiences since then. Not dramatic, not the kind of thing you call the police about. Just moments that don't fit, moments that make you feel watched in a place that should be empty. Enough to make me wonder if what my grandpa told me was only a story. This is the way he always told it, as close as I can remember. In the mid-1800s, deep in the misty hollows of southern Appalachia, there lived a man named Elias Patterson. He wasn't a traveler passing through or a young man testing himself. He was the kind of person who belonged in the woods. A seasoned woodsman with a weathered face, a quiet voice, and the kind of patience you only get after years of being alone with nothing but trees and weather. He lived by himself in a small cabin near a river, far enough away from neighbors that he could go weeks without seeing another human face. Some people can't handle that kind of solitude. Some people start hearing things in the wind. Elias wasn't like that, at least not at first. He knew the sounds of the forest. He knew when something was wrong. He knew when the birds went quiet, and when the insects stopped, when the air itself felt like it was waiting. One evening, with the sun going down and the shadows stretching long between the trees, Elias took his rifle and went out to check his traps before full night came. It was late in the season, when the air starts to get sharp, and the smell of dead leaves is thick on the ground. Twilight in the mountains doesn't fade gently. It drops fast, like a lid closing. At first, the forest seemed normal enough, quiet but not strange. Leaves shifting overhead, a distant owl calling, the soft noise of water somewhere lower in the valley. Elias moved with the kind of steady caution a man learns when he's lived his whole life around bears, snakes, and sudden storm. He didn't hurry, but he didn't waste time either. As he came near a small clearing, he noticed something that made him stop. A deer stood in the center of the glade. At first, that wasn't unusual. Deer are common out there, especially near dusk. But there was something about the way it stood. Stock still, not grazing, not flicking its ears, not turning its head to listen. It looked more like a carved shape than a living animal, as if it had been placed there. Elias squinted, trying to see it clearly as the light faded. The deer's outline almost blended into the dimness, but he could make out enough to feel uneasy. It was shaking, trembling in a way that didn't match the cool air. And the longer he looked, the more wrong it seemed. Its legs looked too long, like they didn't match the body. Its torso looked too thin, stretched in an unnatural way. And when it shifted its weight, the movement was jerky and stiff, like it didn't know how to stand in its own skin. Elias slowly brought his rifle up and aimed. He had a clean shot. A deer that size would have fed him for days. But something in him hesitated. He couldn't explain it. Call it instinct. Call it an old hunter's sense. The part of the brain that warns you before you understand why. The deer turned its head toward him. Elias felt his stomach drop. The eyes weren't right. They weren't soft, side-set deer eyes that look past you like you're just another tree. These eyes faced forward, dark, fixed and focused. They locked onto him like a person looking at you from across a room. The deer opened its mouth. Inside was not the flat, dull mouth of an herbivore. There were teeth, sharp teeth, wet and bright in the fading light. And when it made a sound, it wasn't a bleat or a snort. It was a low, deep growl, like something trying to force an animal shape to make a human kind of threat. Elias took a step back without meaning to. His rifle stayed aimed, but his hands tightened so hard his knuckles ached. "What in God's name are you?" he whispered, more to himself than to the thing standing there. It took a step toward him. The motion was wrong. Not a smooth walk, not even a cautious step. It moved like a puppet pulled by strings that were fraying. The joint angles looked off. The timing was off. Like a creature that had watched deer but had never really been one. Fear hit Elias fully then, sharp and cold. He fired. The gunshot cracked through the trees loud enough to scatter birds. Elias saw the bullet strike. He knew he hit it. The deer didn't fall. It reared up on its hind legs, rising higher than any deer should, and let out a scream that didn't belong to any animal in those mountains. It was thin and wide and full of pain and anger at the same time. A sound that seemed to scrape the inside of Elias's skull. He stumbled backward, his mind racing for something that made sense. This wasn't sickness or injury or a hungry predator. It felt older than that, like something that had been there long before men built cabins and named rivers. Elias turned and ran. He crashed through brush and dead leaves, breath tearing out of him in rough gasps. He didn't try to move quietly. He didn't care about traps anymore. All he could think about was getting to his cabin, to walls, to a door he could lock. Behind him he heard pursuit. Not quick, light hoofbeats, heavy, steady steps that didn't slow, didn't trip, didn't lose the trail. Relentless, as if the forest itself was guiding it. The trees closed in, the ground sloped. The last light disappeared. Elias ran by memory now, knowing every root and rock and fallen log because he'd walked that path 1,000 times. Finally, he broke out of the tree line and into the small clearing where his cabin stood. He lunged up the steps, slammed the front door behind him, and threw the bolt into place. His hands shook so badly he fumbled with the latch twice before he got it set. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and old pine. Familiar, safe, his own space. He grabbed a lantern and lit it with shaking fingers. The flame caught, small and weak at first, then steadied, cast in a dim light that made shadows jump across the walls. Outside, something moved through the leaves. It came right up to the door. Elias froze, gun raised, staring at the wood between them. Then he heard it. Heavy breathing. Not the quick pant of a chased animal. This breathing was slow, close, deliberate, like something leaning its face inches from the door and filling its lungs as if it enjoyed the smell of him inside. Elias held his breath. The breathing stopped. Then there was silence, and after that, faint movement, the sound of something circling around the cabin, step by careful step. Occasionally, a low growl would drift past one window, then fade, like it was testing him, waiting. Minutes passed, then an hour, then more. Elias sat in a chair facing the front door with his rifle aimed, refusing to relax. His muscles began to ache, his eyes burning from staring into the same spot. The lantern hissed softly. Outside, night pressed in on all sides. At some point, without meaning to, he fell asleep. He woke suddenly, not because of a dream, but because of a sound. A creak. His eyes snapped to the front door. It was still shut, still bolted. The creak came again, softer this time. And Elias realized the sound wasn't in front of him. It was behind him. In the panic, he'd forgotten something important. He had built the cabin himself, and he had built it with 2 doors. A front door and a back door leading out near the kitchen. It wasn't common in cabins he'd seen, but Elias had thought it was smart. A way out if trouble came. A way to move supplies in and out easily. A way to keep air flowing in summer. Now he understood what having 2 doors really meant. The creaking stopped. Elias didn't turn around. He couldn't make himself do it. He sat stiff, holding his gun, listening for any other sound. No footsteps, no breathing, nothing. He waited until his arms felt like stone and his shoulders cramped. He waited until his fear dulled into something heavy and numb. Eventually, pale morning light seeped through the curtains. Birds began to call outside as if the world was resetting itself. Elias finally moved. Slowly, carefully, he turned toward the kitchen. Nothing. The back door was shut. The kitchen looked exactly the way he'd left it. No overturned chair, no scratches, no broken latch, no blood, no sign of anything forcing its way in. The air was still. Ordinary. That ordinary scene is what killed him, according to my grandpa, because Elias took it as proof that he'd imagined the whole thing. That loneliness had started playing tricks on him. That maybe he hadn't eaten right, or he'd breathed too much damp mold, or the stress of the season had finally gotten to him. He decided that because he couldn't see evidence, there must not have been anything real to fear. He didn't inspect the door. He didn't look closely at the handle. He didn't step outside and check the ground for tracks. He told himself a comforting lie and let it settle in his mind. But if Elias had looked, if he had taken the time to inspect that back door, he would have seen it. On the other side, hidden from view inside the cabin, there was dried blood and strips of something fibrous and gross, sinew hanging and stuck to the handle like a leftover smear from a hand that wasn't a hand. Dripping, drying, proof that something had been there, touching the door, learning it. Proof that the inside of the cabin had been left clean on purpose. It was too clever to leave a mess where he would notice. As autumn deepened, Elias decided he would wait until spring before coming down the mountain, back toward people. He told himself he wasn't cut out for the wilderness anymore. That age was catching up to him. He'd go once the weather softened, once the passes were safer, once the river wasn't so cold. But Elias wasn't going to make it to spring. He wasn't going to make it to the next day, because now it knew where he lived. It knew the shape of his fear. It knew how he would defend himself. It had tested the doors and listened to him breathe and watched him sit through the night. It knew that if it left the inside clean, he would doubt himself in the morning. It learned. And if it didn't know something, it would find out. That was the worst part. My grandpa always emphasized that. Not the teeth, not the scream, not the blood, the intelligence. It is a clever thing. That evening, Elias went out again to check his traps, trying to convince himself that life could go back to normal if he acted like it was normal. And again he came back to his cabin. But when he stepped inside, he heard no creaking. He heard no sound at all. He didn't have time to sit down. He didn't have time to light the lantern. He didn't have time to raise his rifle. If anyone had been around to check on him, if anyone had cared enough to climb up to that cabin the next morning, all they would have found was dried blood. A lot of it, enough to prove something terrible had happened. But there would have been nothing else. No body, no remains, nothing left to bury. It wastes not, but it does want. It wants human flesh, my grandpa said, and it will have it. It takes what it needs and leaves almost nothing behind, like the mountain itself is swallowing evidence. And just like all who wander too far into those old Appalachian mountains, people who go off trail, people who think they know the woods, people who believe they're alone, Elias saw into something that felt like the mouth of hell. Not the kind from church stories with fire and devils, but the kind that lives in dark places and does not care what you call it. That's how my grandpa always ended it, not with a jump scare, with that calm certainty, like he was telling you the weather forecast. For years I told myself it was only a story meant to scare kids, but now When I see a deer standing too still in the woods, when I see one watching instead of grazing, when I see one move in a way that looks wrong, awkward, stiff, almost like it's remembering how to be a deer instead of actually being one. I hear my grandpa's voice again, slow and even, like he's sitting right beside me. And I don't wait around anymore. I don't try to get a better look. I don't tell myself it's nothing. I leave. Story 6. Most people have never heard someone die. The moaning, the crying, the pleading, the last rough breath before the line goes quiet. Most people won't ever hear those sounds. I do, every day. No, I'm not some violent person with a secret life. I'm a 911 operator. When I took the job 10 years ago, I thought it would mostly be logistics, like air traffic control, but for police, fire, and EMS, a lot of it is exactly that, and on good nights, that part feels almost clean. You take information, you send help, you keep the caller steady until the professionals arrive. Death is not clean. Listening to someone fade out on a phone line leaves a hollow space in you, a place that doesn't fill back in. The first time I heard someone's grandmother die before the ambulance got there, I had to leave work early. The first time a child was on the other end of the line, I locked myself in the bathroom and sobbed for half an hour. Mama's not moving. I need someone big to help. That boy's voice still plays in my head sometimes on a loop when I'm trying to fall asleep. The only way to survive this job is to find something mindless to do after your shift, something that gives your brain a pattern to follow. Some operators knit. One woman I work with quilts scenes from her favorite fantasy books. A bunch of people read those paperback novelizations of horror movies, the ones you find in airport stores. I do puzzles. Every night, no matter how tired I am, I sit at my puzzling table and snap a few pieces into place. I like watching the picture appear bit by bit. It's the closest thing I've found to healing. In my job, you rarely get a full picture. You get fragments, screams, half-said addresses, a sobbed name. Then the line drops and you're left staring at a screen, wondering. With time, you get better at putting calls into mental boxes. Work stays at work. Bad things happen all the time. Your job is to do what you can. People die every day. Sometimes the last human comfort they get is your voice. It's a gift and a curse. People like to imagine 911 as a straightforward job. They picture a calm dispatcher speaking in a firm tone and a police car arriving within seconds. Most of them don't understand what exists outside their own safe bubble, and I don't correct them. I don't want to be the person who ruins someone's lunch by casually mentioning how an elderly man cried like a child because his wife stopped breathing in front of him, and how their adult kids are going to shatter when they get the news. I'd never get invited back to any neighborhood get-together if I started talking like that. But last night, something happened that rattled me in a way I haven't been rattled in years. It wasn't just one call. It was a chain of them spaced out like a heartbeat. Every hour for my entire shift. Same number, same location, same man. I'd just settled in for my shift when I noticed the usual mess at my station. Fran, the woman I share a cube wall with, had left loose corn chips on the console again. I muttered a few words that would have gotten me written up if anyone heard, and I swept them into the trash. Fran is sweet. She'll bring you soup when you're sick. She'll cover your break if you look like you're about to cry. But cleanliness is not one of her strengths. I've had a quiet suspicion for years that she hoards, but I'm never going to her house to find out. You ready? Mary asked from across the aisle. Mary is one of those people who stays cheerful no matter what. I don't know if it's a talent or a defense mechanism, but she has it. She's our jokester, the one who keeps the air from turning too heavy. In this job, you need that kind of person. Mary's humor is dark, and it doesn't match her church board member look at all. But nobody here judges. We all have sides we don't show outside this room. How's it been so far? I asked. Mary shook her head. I'm not saying the Q word and jinxing us, she said. Quiet. The forbidden word in dispatch. Say it and the phones explode. It's like saying Macbeth in a theater. Please don't, I told her. I'm still recovering from yesterday. Full moon always brings out the nuts. Supposed to be full again tonight, she said, shooting me finger guns. Get ready for some corpses. Despite myself, I laughed. Geez, Mary. She shrugged. It's coming. Always does. Violent weirdos love moonlight. That's why we call them lunatics. Luna. Lunatic. No, it isn't, I said, half smiling. Seriously? The Latin footprint is large, dear, she said, already sliding her headset on. And if there's anything I know, it's Latin men with big footprints. I shook my head. What would Bob say if he heard you? Bob knows my weaknesses, she said. He screws up and I'm on the first flight to Guadalajara. I sat down and adjusted my headset over my prematurely graying hair. And miss all this? Faye. She waved a hand like she was brushing away smoke. Her line rang, and she sighed. Back to the grind. I was barely settled when my first call came in. 911. What's the nature of your emergency? Static filled my ear. In the age of cell phones, it happens constantly. Pocket dials, bad connections, phones dropping between towers. Patience is most of this job, patience and calm. If you panic, the caller panics harder. If you can't stay steady, you don't last here. 911, hello? Coughing came through the line, harsh and wet. I think my house is on fire, a man said. Middle-aged, maybe older, hoarse voice, like smoke had already started working on his throat. My mind started building a profile automatically. Smoke inhalation. Possible confusion. Could be intoxication. Could be shock. Fingers already moving on the keyboard, pulling up the form, logging details. Okay, I said, keeping my voice even. What's your address? 1812 Blanchard, he said. White House, near the creek. Okay, I told him, and typed it in. What happened? Can you see flames? I can't, he said. I'm in my bedroom. I don't know what happened. It's coming from the other room. A lot of smoke. The door to my room feels warm. I hate fire calls. Fires don't behave. They don't stay contained. They don't wait politely for rescue. Once the couple got hit by a semi, trapped in their car, and I stayed on the line while the engine caught and they burned alive. That sound stays with you. I have fire and an ambulance on the way, I told him. Is there anyone else in the house? It's... Jesus, the fire is... He coughed hard. It's so hot. Help is coming. Is there any way to get out? A window? It's nailed shut. That made me pause. People nail windows shut sometimes, but it's not common. Not in the suburb. Not unless someone is paranoid or hiding something, or someone else nailed it shut for them. I added a note. Can you break the window? I asked. It's hurricane rated, he said, like he'd said those words before. But let me try. Hold on. I heard him move away, heard dull thuds like he was slamming something against glass. No shatter, no crack. Then he came back, breathless. "It's not working," he said. "More smoke is coming through." "Okay," I said. "Get low to the floor. Stay calm. Do you have anything heavy? A bat? A chair? Anything you can use to break it?" More coughing. The line went dead. "Damn it," I whispered. I immediately sent the call through to dispatch. "Fire an ambulance to 1812 Blanchard Street. Adult male trapped in a bedroom. Believes no one else is inside." Then I tried calling the number back. A recorded voice told me the line was no longer in service. That didn't make sense. A house phone line could die in a fire, sure, but this sounded like the number itself didn't exist anymore. I relayed it anyway. "Dispatch, I can't reconnect. Line says disconnected." A pause. Then the dispatcher came back, sounding uncertain. "Operator, what was the address again?" 1812 Blanchard. White House near the creek." "Operator," he said. "We've got a unit on Blanchard. They're saying the street numbers end at 1810. There's no 1812. And there's no fire, no smoke, nothing." I stared at my screen. "Let me double check," I said, though I already knew what I'd typed. I looked at my notes. 1812 Blanchard Street. Clear as day. "Dispatch, that's what he told me. I'm going to try the number again." Same message. Disconnected. The dispatcher sounded more annoyed now. "Operator, there isn't a house with that number." Mary's head rose above the cube wall like she'd been listening. She walked over, pulled up the recorded call, and replayed it. Every call is saved. We listened together. And when the man said the address, Mary wrote it down and turned the pad toward me. 1812 Blanchard. We hadn't misheard it. "We've confirmed the address given to us," I told dispatch. "Caller said 1812 Blanchard. White House near the creek." "We'll circle again," the dispatcher said. "But this may be a prank." "Copy," I said, and ended the exchange. Mary leaned closer. "Full moon," she mouthed. If that was acting, he was good, I said quietly. He sounded sincere. "You'd be surprised," she murmured back. "People do weird things to feel powerful." I leaned back, trying to settle my stomach. I didn't have time to spiral because the line rang again with a new emergency. That's one thing about this job. You don't get to process in the moment. The next crisis always comes. An hour later, after taking a handful of normal calls, my phone rang again. 911. "What is the nature of your emergency?" Hello?" the man said, voice low like a stage whisper. "I want to report a fire." I recognized him immediately. "Sir," I said, "did you call earlier?" "I don't know," he replied earnestly. "I just woke up in my house and I can smell burning. Smoke is so thick." He coughed. "It's everywhere." Mary looked over and mouthed, "Is this him?" I nodded. She came around to stand beside my desk, listening. "Are you still inside your house?" I asked. "I think so. What is the address?" 1812 Blanchard. "We sent units there," I said carefully. "But they could not find a house at that address. Are you sure that's correct?" "Yes," he said, coughing again. "I know my address." Mary leaned in and whispered, "Clarify for the record. You're saying 1812 Blanchard," I repeated. "Correct?" "Yes," he said. Then he paused like he was listening. "Oh, I found my bedroom door. It's not hot anymore." "Can you exit the room?" I asked. A loud bang came through the phone, followed by a nervous yelp. The door fell off its hinges, he said, voice farther away now. I'm walking down my hallway, but it's pitch black. The walls are covered in heavy soot. Mary quickly wrote on her pad. Ask if he can hear the unit. Sir, I said, we have a unit near your location, but they can't find you. Do you hear anyone outside? Sirens? Someone calling out? My hallway isn't this long, he said, like that was the only thing he could focus on. Sir, can you call out for... He screamed. The line went dead. I felt my whole body go tight. I hit redial immediately. Dead line. Disconnected message again. Mary was already relaying to dispatch that he'd screamed and the call dropped. Dispatch came back almost right away. Unit says they didn't hear any screaming. This isn't prank, I said, voice sharper than I meant it to be. Something's happening. It's a weird one, Mary admitted. Did you hear anything that could place him? Any traffic, a TV, anything? No, I said. And I still don't even have his name. That was when Stephen, our supervisor, walked over. He'd seen me throw my headset off earlier, and now he was doing what he always does. Checking the temperature, making sure we weren't losing it at our stations. Ladies, he said, voice smooth and calm. What's going on? I'm sorry about the headset, I told him. He raised a hand. We're not robots, he said gently. We get worked up. Mary gave him the quick version. Guy has called twice reporting a fire. Gives address that doesn't exist. Units can't find him. Stephen frowned. He called an hour apart. A real house fire would have eaten the place by now. I don't know what this is, I said. He sounds genuine, but confused. Stephen tilted his head. Injured? Coughing, I said. Maybe smoke. Maybe head trauma. I can't tell. He steepled his fingers. Okay, let's document everything clearly. Cover ourselves. Can I listen to both calls? Of course. Stephen plugged in his headphones and listened. Once, then again. Then he paused the recording and rewound a few seconds. When he removed his headset, his expression had changed. You did a great job, he told me. Very professional. Thanks, I said, though my throat felt tight. He leaned closer. Did you catch a woman screaming in the background? I blinked. What woman? It's faint, he said, but it's there in both calls. He queued it up and handed me the audio. I pressed the speakers against my ears. There it was. A scream, thin and distant, like it was coming through a wall or across a field. My stomach dropped. How did you catch that? Stephen gave a small, humorless smile. Years of listening for details. If he calls again, he said, flag me immediately. Let's see if we can figure this out. When he walked away, Mary leaned in. He's worried, she whispered. I know, I said. I've never seen him like that. An hour later, the man called again. Hello, he said softly. I want to report a fire. Are you still at 1812 Blanchard Street? I asked. I don't know, he said. I was, but I've been walking down this hallway for a while now. Stephen was already at my shoulder, writing questions on a pad. What's his name? Sir, I said. What's your name? Mike, he replied. Mike what? I pressed. He didn't answer. Instead, he said, I swear I heard footsteps. Stephen scribbled again. Ask about the women. Mike, I said. I heard women screaming in the background. Do they need help? No, he blurted. Too fast, too sharp. There aren't any women. Stephen and I exchanged a look. Mary rose behind the cube wall, listening, her face suddenly serious. Mike, I tried again, is there someone we can call? A neighbor? Family? Anyone who can help find you? It's getting hot, he said. I think I'm nearing the fire. Smoke is thicker. He coughed hard. I think I'm in my living room, but none of my things are here. Was I robbed? The line dropped. Again. Stephen listened to the recording with more intensity this time. He replayed it 3-4 times. When he pulled off the headset, he looked pale. I'm hearing wailing, he said quietly. Not just a scream. Wailing, like a crowd, like a stadium full of people grieving. Mary and I listened. Once we knew what to listen for, it was there. A low, layered sound under Mike's voice, like pain packed into a distant roar. Stephen called a police contact on his personal phone. He asked for someone to check the area around Blanchard, the creek, the end of the street, anything that matched the description. When he hung up, he tried to sound calm again. It's probably a prank, he said, but his eyes didn't match the words. We'll figure it out. As soon as he walked away, Mary leaned in close. He's hoping it's a prank, she said. But I don't think he believes it. What do you think it is? I asked. Mary hesitated. I think Stephen's worried it's someone taunting us, like a killer. But I think it's more likely a guy with serious head trauma or on drugs, lost somewhere dangerous. That's what I think too, I said. But he sounds aware, like he knows he's confused. Mary made a face. Not sure I follow. Like he's trapped somewhere that doesn't match his memories, I said. Like the place itself is messing with him. Mary's phone buzzed while she was standing there. She glanced down at it, and her expression shifted. Hey, she said slowly, you're not going to believe what my housing guy told me. Before I could ask, my line rang again. I answered. 911. What's the nature of your emergency? It was Mike, and his voice was barely a whisper. Something is stalking me, he said. I can't see it, but it's moving in the shadows. My skin went cold. Mike, where are you? I asked. How do you know my name? He asked, startled. You've called several times, I said. Mike, is there a safe place you can go? A room with a lock? A window? On the line, a slow, deliberate growl cut through the background noise. Stephen appeared at my side instantly. The growl came again, closer, more defined. Under it was that wailing sound. And now it wasn't just wailing. I could hear screams layered into it. Men and women, and something else I couldn't place. Some voices weren't English. Some sounded like languages I'd never heard before. Mike, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, tell me your last name. The smoke is thinning, he said, like he hadn't heard me. Oh, Jesus. Can you hear the screaming? Oh, I didn't think anyone else could hear it. I can hear it, I said. Mike, what's happening? There's a light ahead, he whispered. Someone is calling me. Are those your guys? Are you there? I looked at Stephen. He shook his head no. Mike, I said, that's not us. Do not go toward them. Find somewhere to hide. I see someone, Mike said, voice lifting. Hello? Mike, stop, I said. Where are you? The line went dead. I swallowed hard. Someone is going to hurt him, I said. He's in danger. Mary finally spoke, voice tight. He's not at 1812 Blanchard, she said. Stephen and I turned to her. Because it burned down, she continued, in 1987. The room felt suddenly too bright, too cold. What? Stephen asked. My housing guy ran it, Mary said. 1812 was the first house on what became Blanchard Street. Back then it was rural, off a dirt road near a creek. Now it's a subdivision. The house burned down and was never rebuilt. My mouth went dry. So what is he calling from? Mary's eyes were wide. The owner's first name was Michael, she said. Fire department suspected arson but couldn't prove it. And they never found the body. Stephen's face went still. What about the last name? Mary shook her head. The file was damaged, unreadable. The phone rang again like it had heard us talking. All three of us stared at it. Then I answered. 911? What's the nature of your emergency? At first it was just crackling, static, the jitter of a connection that shouldn't exist. Then the wailing returned, louder and clearer. It sounded like it was coming from a huge space packed with suffering. There were dozens of voices, different languages, some words I couldn't even separate into language. Mike, I said, forcing the name out. Mike, are you there? The connection shifted. The static thinned, like a curtain being pulled back. And then Mike's voice came through again, but he wasn't talking to me. He was talking to someone else. I've been walking in this smoky room forever, Mike said, voice shaking. A second voice answered him. It was deep and calm, measured, not rushed, not panicked. The voice of someone in control. Indeed, the stranger said. You've been lost for quite some time, but your time in the smoke has come to an end. If that's true, Mike said, gagging, what's that smell? A stench you've smelled before, the stranger said. I don't know what you mean, Mike whispered. Yes, you do, the stranger replied. They're all there, waiting for you. Mike, I said into the headset, my voice trembling now. Mike, can you hear me? He didn't react. Then I heard it, clear as if it were in the room with me. Fire igniting. Not the distant sound of a campfire. Not the controlled roar of a fireplace. This was sudden, hungry ignition. Like a room flashing over. I could hear it travel. I could hear the way it grabbed air and grew. The crackle became a roar, and then came sounds I will never forget as long as I live. Human flesh sizzling. Screams. Not one scream. Many. Layered, overlapping, begging, praying, pleading with a God who did not answer. I closed my eyes and still saw it anyway, as if the sound itself forced pictures into my brain. Bodies twisting, hands flailing, skin turning to something dark and brittle and lifting into the air like ash. I started crying without realizing it. Doreen? Mary asked softly, but she sounded far away, like she was at the end of a tunnel. The noise rose and rose, a wall of suffering, and then, suddenly, it stopped. Silence. Then quiet sobbing. Mike was crying. I couldn't help it, he said weakly. I needed to do it to them. I'm as God made me. The stranger's voice returned, calm as ever. They're waiting for you. Please, Mike choked. Please, God, let this end. The stranger laughed, deep and slow, like a door closing. God is not welcome where we're going. Where are we going? Mike whispered. I pressed the headset tighter to my ears, like if I listened hard enough, I could change what was happening. Like if I stayed on the line, I could pull him back. The stranger spoke again. Your time has come, Michael. Your long walk has ended. Through this door. There was a sound like knuckles rapping against wood. The echo was wrong, like it was in a space too large to be a room. Through this door, you will finally find answers. Knowledge your kind is not given until we decide you've earned it. But it comes with a cost, a debt you will pay until we say otherwise. Michael, I whispered into the mic. Michael, can you hear me? The line dropped. I ripped the headset off. My hair got caught and pulled, but I barely felt it. I set it down hard on the desk and looked at Stephen. Tears were sliding down my face, and I couldn't make words behave. I was all I could get out. Stephen didn't hesitate. He put a hand on my shoulder, solid and warm. Go home, he said. Mary came around the cube wall and hugged me tight. She pressed my face into her shoulder and whispered a prayer over and over, like repetition could build a shield. I clung to her like a drowning person. When I finally pulled away, I thanked them both and walked out. But I didn't go home. I went to Blanchard Street. I drove the length of it until the numbers stopped. 1,810. End of the line. Past that was trees and darkness, a thin strip of woods that didn't look like much in the daytime. But at night, it felt like a boundary. I parked and got out, my pulse loud in my ears. White House, near the creek. I walked to the end of the street and stepped into the woods. The grass was tall, and under it, I could just make out old tire ruts, barely visible. You wouldn't notice them unless you were looking for them, but I was. I followed the ruts like they were a trail. After a few minutes, I saw something glint in the moonlight. I crouched and pushed aside tangled weeds. Braided black wires, old power lines, maybe phone lines, fallen and rotted, half swallowed by the ground. It felt like finding a dead vein. I heard the creek before I saw it. The water made a steady sound that should have been peaceful. It wasn't. It was too constant, like it had been talking for decades and never stopped. I turned on my flashlight and walked along the creek until I found a low rise of earth, a berm near the edge. The ground looked different there, darker in spots, like it had been burned long ago and then covered over. I kicked away dirt, ash. Under the ash, old charred debris, the outline of something that had been a foundation. It took my breath. The burned remains of a house, hidden in plain sight, swallowed by brush and time. My body moved before my brain caught up. I walked to what would have been the back of the house. I dropped to my knees and started digging with my hands. It didn't take long. The soil changed color, black to gray, as ash mixed into it. A few handfuls more, and my fingers hit something hard. I recoiled, then forced myself back in. Bone, a femur, polished by fire and time, still there like the earth had refused to fully take it. If I kept digging, I knew I'd find more. Enough to tell the story nobody wanted to hear. He'd kidnapped them, beat them, burned them, hidden what was left under his home. And when the house went up, he disappeared into the same fire he'd used on them. For nearly 30 years, he'd been right. No one had found them. Time had almost won. Almost. I rocked back on my heels and cried. Not because I knew their names, but because I knew their ending. I knew them only in the worst possible moment, and I hated that I shared even that connection with the man who did it. Then something made the hair rise on the back of my neck. I turned. Dozens of small white lights floated over a patch of ground near the old wires, hovering like fireflies, but steadier, brighter, and too still. For a moment they held there, as if waiting for me to notice them. When I did, they faded, one after another like a breath leaving a mouth. I walked to where they'd been. The old phone line disappeared into the dirt, like it was plugged into the ground itself. Mike's body was probably under there somewhere too, whatever was left of him. The cruel irony of him meeting fire didn't escape me. But I wasn't there for him. I was there for the people he'd taken. I stepped back from the hole, hands shaking, and pulled out my phone. I dialed 911. When the operator answered, I heard my own voice on the line, steady in the way training makes it steady, even when your insides are falling apart. "Hello," I said. "I need you to send the police. I've just found human remains.